Hello everyone, my name is Jacqueline Apton and today I'll be talking about gender and culture and how those shape international relations. So we often hear about power, security, and economics in IR, but we rarely hear about how gender roles or cultural values influence global politics. So today, my goal is to show everyone how these two forces, which we're looking at again, gender and culture, help explain global inequalities, policies, and even diplomacy. So I'm going to turn this around so I can read it and then I'll put it back to you. But why gender and culture matter in IR? So traditional IR ignored gender and culture, focused on state power, not people, and newer IR theories challenge that, adds human perspectives to global politics. So, as I said, traditional IR, especially looking at realism, focused mainly on states, war, and people. States, war, and power, not people. My bad. But gender and culture introduce human experiences. So that looks at how men and women in communities are affected by policies, wars, and globalization differently from each other. This shift actually helps us to see that politics isn't just about governments, it's also about social identities and everyday life. Feminist IR theory examines how gender roles shape power structures, challenges male-dominated global politics, and highlights women's experiences in war, peace, and diplomacy. I have a comic strip that is a bunch of men. I'm going to show it to you, but I'm just going to read it since it might be a lot hard. And the man is saying, "The meeting of the Committee on Women's Equality is now in session. Thanks for the coffee, Mildred. You can go now." Because that is kind of how politics used to be. So feminist IR theory asks the big question, their main question is that where are the women in world politics? So like historically, diplomacy and military leaderships have been male dominated. You can see that now it's a little more, it's better now, but there is still a lot of disparity that we just don't realize. So yeah. But like feminist scholars would argue that this affects decisions about war and peace. So for example, if we look at women's peace movements, we can see that they often emphasize cooperation over conflict, and that is like a different way of understanding security. So my next one is gender and global conflict. Women often excluded from peace negotiations, gender-based violence used as a weapon of war, and UNSC Resolution 1325, Women, Peace, and Security. And then I have up here a image, and one thing I'm going to point out about this image, it's women, war, and gender-based violence, but one point I really want to point out is that it says, when women are included in peace process, there is a 35% increase in the probability of an agreement lasting of at least 15 years. So here is that picture. In conflict, women and girls face unique harms. For example, like sexual violence is used as a weapon of war. You can see that all over history. Different groups would invade different countries and they would rape and kill the women. Women would even go to the extent of killing themselves so they wouldn't have to be submitted to that. It still goes on every day. Not every day, but in real life, it's still a modern thing and it's still being weaponized. So even though that is occurring to women, women still are yet to be included in a peace negotiation, and they're still left out of it, even though it directly involves them. So we're introduced into the UN Resolution 1325, and that recognizes that peace is more sustainable when women are a part of the process, because they bring perspectives often overlooked by male leaders. My next slide is culture and global power. Culture shapes norms, diplomacy, and identity. Western versus non-Western worldviews and cultural misunderstandings can cause conflicts. So culture influences like how nations act. This can range from communication styles to values about power and cooperation. So Western states often promote individualism and democracy, while non-Western states focus more on emphasizing community and tradition. So when these worldviews clash, misunderstandings happen, like in foreign aid, human rights debates, or even global trade. My next slide is non-Western feminist perspectives. Western feminism doesn't fit all contexts. Post-colonial feminism addresses global inequality. Example, women's rights in the global South. So, non-Western feminism challenges the idea that all women face the same struggles. For example, in the global South, issues like poverty, colonial legacy, and education access often matter more than to the traditional workplace equality. So, post-colonial feminism actually argues that global gender inequality can't be separated from race, culture, and history. Okay. I'm actually sorry. I'm going to include my image, which is Women Rights or Human Rights. It's the Statue of Liberty. That is my image. Cultural norms and gender roles. Gender expectations differ across societies. Patriarchy, religion, and traditional influence politics. Example, restrictions on women's rights in some regions. So, the image I'm going to include first is only 14 countries have full equal rights for women, which is very crazy stat. So it says cultural norms define what's appropriate for men and women. It also shapes like policies and politics. In some cultures, women can't hold political power or even access education equally to their counterparts of males. Understanding these norms is a very crucial for international diplomacy and development projects, because applying Western ideals everywhere doesn't always work, as we can see. I did a case study for Afghanistan. It's women's rights under Taliban rule, global response and cultural complexity in Western interventions versus local traditions. And my image is stand with Afghanistan women. So for Afghanistan is a really clear example of gender and culture colliding in IR, because again, Western countries tried to come in there and promote gender inequality through like intervention, but ignored the local cultural and religious context that Afghanistan had. So when the troops ended up leaving, many of those rights just completely collapsed, and that really showed how cultural understanding is essential for lasting change. Okay. Gender and global institutions, UN Women, NGOs, and gender mainstreaming, push for equality in peacekeeping, policy and leadership, progress but major gap remains. My image is of UN Women, United Nations entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women. So there's organizations like UN Women and NGOs which have pushed for gender mainstreaming. This really means gender perspectives in all policies. They want to include gender perspectives in all policies. Peacekeeping now includes actually gender advisors, and more women serve in leadership roles. But still, women remain underrepresented in high-level diplomacy and conflict resolution. Connecting gender, culture, and power. Gender and culture shape global hierarchies, influence who gets power, voice, and recognition, and both challenge traditional IR theories. So, gender and culture play a heavy role and are deeply tied to power. So they influence who has a voice in politics, diplomacy, and international law. Recognizing these factors challenges traditional theories that treat all states or people just as equal players. My next slide is theoretical connection. Realism ignores culture and gender and focuses on power. Liberalism supports equality and cooperation. Constructivism, culture and identity shape behavior. And feminism exposes hidden inequalities. So, as we know, each theory views gender and culture very differently from each other. Realists see states as rational actors, and gender is just like irrelevant to them. They just throw it out the window. Constructivists, on the other hand, tend to argue identity and culture state behavior. Culture creates state behavior. And then feminist adds that ignoring gender hides real sources of inequality in the system. So, my next slide is why this matters today. So, gender inequality affects global peace. Cultural understanding builds better diplomacy. Diverse voices equals stronger international cooperation. And then I created an image that says the political divide by the numbers. Women make up only 23.7% of Congress. Women of color, 8.8%. Only 9 out of 50 governors are women. Globally, women make up over 50% of the population, but hold less than approximately 20 to 25% of public offices. Women make up approximately 25% of mayors and state legislators. And the U.S. ranks approximately 75th in the world in the percentage of women in the national legislature. So today's IR can't be understood without gender and culture. From climate change to migration policies affect both men and women significantly differently, and we need to be able to recognize that. So feminist cultural sensitivity can prevent conflict and promote cooperation, making the world systems more than just effective. So my conclusion is gender and culture are essential to IR. They influence policy, power, and identity, and understanding them creates fairer global systems. So just to wrap up, gender and culture aren't side issues in IR. They're central. They're very important to it. To shape the way nations interact, who has power and what values dominate the system. If international relations continues to ignore them, it misses half the story, which is very important. And my last slide is my works cited. Thank you very much for listening to my issue.